Inspecting network port activity is vital for understanding data flow, identifying active services, detecting security breaches, and generally troubleshooting network issues. So let's look at some ways we can inspect ports in Windows and Linux. We'll use the Netstat tool in both of them and be able to observe the subtle differences between both. And then in Linux, we'll also use another tool called the SS tool, which is more recent and has more features. So let's dive in. I'll start off in Windows here with Netstat TAC-H on a CMD session to get an idea about what we can do and use. Now there's a couple standout ones here like TAC-A for displaying all connections and listening ports. That's really handy. And then we have TAC-N for displaying addresses and port numbers in a numerical form. That's just a little bit easier to read. And then finally TAC-O, which displays the owning process ID or the PID. And that's really handy to see what port activity is associated with which process. So let's run a Netstat TAC-ANO right now, and this will provide us a good look at all TCP and UDP connections along with their PID. This is great. Now we can also get more specific, and we can pipe this over and use the find command and just look for specific TCP activity with find TCP wrapped in quotes. So now we can distill that further and get TCP activity. That's pretty handy if we're looking for TCP-based connections. Similarly, we can also do this for UDP. So we could do Netstat TAC-ANO and then pipe and find for UDP just like that as well. And while those are great, a lot of times in troubleshooting and triage, we're going to be looking for listening ports. So we can also find listening as well. And that's really handy to see if something is doing something that it's not supposed to be doing. And so inspecting ports like this is pretty straightforward unless you have some context to investigate further. So another good thing we can do is investigate statistics. And we can do that with Netstat TAC-S. This gives us a full summary of the IPv4 and IPv6 statistics of what's going in and what's going out. That's pretty handy. So all the commands that we ran so far are more like snapshots, but we can actually create an interval by running something like Netstat TAC-ANO, but then just put a number at the end. So let's rebuild that command again, but this time let's throw a 5 at the end. And that will give us a full breakdown of the output of Netstat TAC-ANO, but every 5 seconds. So that's kind of handy if we want to just inspect something and leave a terminal going looking for activity. And that's all well and good, but let's use a proper example. Like let's just say we wanted to inspect SSH, so port 22. We can pipe and find and look specifically for :22 for port activity on SSH and leave that running every 5 seconds. Now that's kind of cool, right? So nothing's going to evade our eyes now if we know exactly what to look for every 5 seconds like this. Cool, so with Netstat on Windows, we can generally get just about everything we need for network activity and ports going in and out. Let's move over to Linux now. Now Netstat in Linux is ran the same way, but with different flags. We're going to use TAC-T for showing TCP connections, TAC-U for showing UDP connections, TAC-L for displaying listening server sockets, and then TAC-P for showing the PID, and then finally TAC-N, which is similar to show numeric addresses and port numbers instead of resolving them to names. And now for me, I just like to remember them as Netstat-ANO and Netstat-Tulpin, and that sticks in my brain a little bit easier. So let's see the output. It's essentially the same, except we don't have to worry too much about piping and finding like we did with Netstat and Windows. And we can also get summary statistics as well with the TAC-I flag. Now, a little bit less detail compared to what we saw in Windows, but also more specific at the same time and more summarized. Netstat Linux also has that count feature, but you just have to specify it with a TAC-C. So let's do Netstat TAC-IC and let that run a couple times. All right, now let's go and take a look at that SS tool and do a quick what is. SS is for socket statistics. And this one is pretty similar to Netstat. And for the most part, really comes down to a matter of preference. Which one is a little bit easier for you to read? One's more spaced out. SS TAC-Tuln is sort of the equivalent to Netstat TAC-Tulpin, like this. I'll line them up side by side. Now, what's actually interesting in comparing the output is that the states of the connections are actually fully described in SS. We have unconnected and listening. And when we look at the output for Netstat, the state activity is described for some of them are listening, but then there's several that we have no idea about. So there's some level of ambiguity. And there's some little differences like that between the SS and Netstat tool that I always recommend running both. The output's a little bit easier to read. in one tool versus the other based on your preference. And then additionally, if you look over here, SS is describing that some of these connections are sending packets, but in Netstat, they're all zeroed out. And then finally, SS is missing some of the PID activity, whereas Netstat has some of it. So it's always worth running both of them as a quick snapshot, at least in my experience, and I definitely recommend that. Cool. Now we'll just look at two more comparisons between them. SS TAC-T for TCP connections and Netstat TAC-T for TCP connections. There is a subtle difference as well. Note how Netstat includes the letters of IP on the local address, which can be maybe a little confusing in the eyes where it's stripped out from SS. And then when we compare state activity in both, with SS you can declare state inspection right away. So if you're looking for established state connections, you can just type that in. But with Netstat, it's a little bit older, so there's some pipe and grep activity that has to be accounted for. Okay, great, and that's inspecting ports. So now you're fully equipped with the tools you need to investigate unknown or anomalous port activity.